Hello, welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of Talking Sex, the podcast in which men talk about sex, but with a lot of honesty. No nudge nudge, wink wink jokes, no exaggerated accounts of sexual conquest. This podcast is brought to you by Misters, India's leading men's sexual wellness brand. We record this live on the Backstage app every other Wednesday at 8 pm. So some odd noises make it to the final version if you listen to it on other platforms. Today, we revisit a topic. Dissatisfaction with sex in marriage is a big issue. 37% of men in their 40s who have been married for 10 years or more talk to us about being dissatisfied with either the amount or the frequency of sex they have. And different sources suggest an even higher number, and therefore we decided it's time to revisit this topic. This podcast is brought to you by Misters, India's leading men's sexual wellness brand. With us today are the usual suspects: Brewmaster Sunny, emerging perfumer Bailey, and a couple of special guests: Gaurav, whose relationship itself is around voting age, has reached voting age, and Pals, whose relationship is almost there. Also joining us as an expert, again, coming back to the show, is Dr. Preeti Singh, Gurgaon's rockstar expert in clinical psychology and Chief Medical Officer of Listen and founder of Seamless Minds. Welcome everyone to the show. Very good to have you here.
Great to be here. Hello.
Hello. Awesome. So I guess first we need context about what more or less sex in marriage means. It is quite obvious that when we are young, we have the hormones, the physical ability, and the desire to have lots of sex. But both do decline with age. Nobody is expecting to have sex twice daily, day in and day out. So let's start with going around the table and discuss the idea of frequency and patterns when we say we are having enough sex or not.
Yeah, I can go first.
So what do you think, Sunny? Yes, please.
Yeah, so although I think I would be tempted to say that it changes from time to time, and to be able to have sex when I feel like having sex is the right amount of sex. But to try to quantify it so that everyone, like other people, can relate to it, I feel that twice a week is good sex life in one's 40s, which would be approximately 10 plus years after marriage. And I could live with once a week, and a frequency lower than that would seem too little.
Right. And hello, pals. Welcome to the show. Would you like to go next on this tricky opening question?
Suhas, thank you so much. Yes, obviously you want the woman's point of view. Sunny, I think you're gifted 2 times a week, but I think with a 7-year mark, I think you're still there. I think once it crosses perhaps the double-digit figure, I think twice a week would be like perfect, and you're there. Well, I don't really want to put a stopper in the whole thing, but
Right.
I think the need perhaps goes down, and hence the numbers go down. So to be able to quantify would be a little difficult for me right now.
Right.
But I would definitely say that the quality of the sex changes, and hence the quantity is not a deciding factor. I hope that answers
Right.
that.
It does very categorically. And we also have to ask Gaurav, because today Bailey and I do not have the right membership credentials to share our views on this. So Gaurav is the other person who's been in a long-term relationship. What do you think, Gaurav? How does it change, evolve? What have been your reflections and observations?
Right, so it's been 20 years of marriage for me, and another additional 3-4 years, I think, before that. And I mean, no doubt that it does decline, as Sunny said, and Pals also talked about. I think I wouldn't say there is a steady frequency, but yes, clearly there are patches when the frequency increases, especially if you are off work. You've taken both you and your partner have taken maybe 3-4 days off, which coincide. Things do seem much more conducive, I guess. Otherwise, in the daily, rat race, I guess once a fortnight works out probably on an average, and it also kind of goes more into the intimacy zone as compared to the sexual act itself. And I think as you age, then the need to get together for intimacy perhaps is higher as compared to just the sexual act.
Right, that's a great point. Bailey, you want to chip in before we go to the expert?
I'll just say that having read about this, the opening remarks are more honest and refreshing and frank than probably pages and pages which of stuff around this is available online. So looking forward to the rest of the conversation, but amazing variety and
Indeed.
frankness on the table.
Indeed. Indeed. So, Dr. Preeti, my question to you would be one, that what do you make of these opening statements when it comes to the frequency, let's say even quality of sex? And second, often one finds, especially in academic literature on the subject, that about frequency is supposed to be a fool's errand. Like, it seems like that's the wrong data point to look at. But it's interesting that smart people, when thinking about their own experiences, often do end up talking about frequency. Literature suggests that it's about two people do, and also broadly on what people said already.
Right. So I guess, yes, I think I'll start with your statement, Suhas, and your, the data that you kind of shared about, men not satisfied with their sexual life, maybe in their late 30s or in 40s for that matter.
Right.
So yes, I guess that's pretty relevant, information. But what is surprising is, the duration of relationship impacts a woman's desire or intimacy more negatively than men's. So I don't know if we can have data for that part of it. So now when we are looking at this kind of a combination, it does somewhere pose a challenge. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yeah, Preeti, you are.
Yeah, we can all hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that is one aspect of it, that the duration does impact the desire. But there are so many factors which could actually, when we go down the line, we will be able to talk about it. There are so many factors which would impact the frequency, the quality, and, the desire about the intimacy aspect of it for that matter. But yes, the frequency, I guess, when coming to the frequency, it definitely would be a baseline for each couple, because how they began, that would be kind of everyone would be having they would be having their own baseline, which we say. And going down the line or going down the years, how that comes down, for somebody once a week is good, for somebody twice a week is good, for somebody once in 2 weeks is good.
Right.
So it could just vary from person to person depending on how they started with, what has been their baseline to begin with.
Right.
And I think that should be a good benchmark to see that where we are on it, and
So I just wanted to press on a bit on the frequency question before we move on. My sense is that yes, frequencies depend on, but I do feel that there must be a frequency at which, in a situation of a couple monogamously together in the long term, at which one should probably talk about it anyway. So, for example, while one can't say this is the ideal frequency, but suppose a couple comes over and says, we haven't had sex for 8 months, say. Like, so some denominator of how many months have people gone without, which is often the truth also, like we see in sitcoms, etc. People saying, I haven't had sex for so long. So, do you think there can be a limit like that at which at least you probably should think about it and talk about it with your partner?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You know what? There is this whole diagnosis when we talk about sexual interest and arousal disorder. And there, the span that we look at is anything 6 months or more.
Right.
Okay. So
Right.
I feel if you've gone beyond those 6 months or, you're reaching that 6 month thing,
Right.
it should somewhere ring a bell that, there is some challenge somewhere,
Right.
So yeah, so that absolutely, I think I'll give that
That's
duration
good and
in terms
actionable.
of 6.
That after 6 months, at least a conversation is due.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Interesting. I also wanted to related theme, and I will again do the same format. Quickly go around the table. So there is this trope of how like how it comes down. There's a generally sloping downward trend, like Pal said in her first answer, and everyone implied it. But in lived experience, is it a steady downward trend, or do you experience it, or has it been experienced as like with enough spikes as it has fallen down, but still patches? Like what? How clean is this sloping downward slope? How clean is the downward slope? So if you can go around the table, and maybe Sunny, you can go first.
Yeah, I don't think that it is a steady downward slope. There are definitely peaks and troughs, and the peaks can be as passionate as when the relationship began, and the troughs can be what would cause medical concern by Preeti's definition.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Pals, what do you think about this one? Like, what's been the experience? Pals and Gaurav, if you can go in turn.
Yeah, so let me go in first. So, Sunny, I agree with you. It's not a steady decline, but spikes and peaks and troughs. What I've also seen is a lot of it depends on different uh, stages of your life, and especially from the women point of view, I think childbirth and all usually puts a big uh, weighs in really heavily on this.
Right.
A lot of it depends, yes, on the woman's need for being desired physically at a point of time, and I think it all follows that trend. So maybe that's a leading indicator. The way you guys, when you talk about your numbers, maybe that is a leading indicator.
Right.
The way perhaps the body changes, the way the phases in your life, things that happen, career changes that happen, movement of, when you're moving from place to place, that can affect, the needs of the family per se, and then eventually it trickles down to your sex life.
Right.
So I think that's what I have seen from my personal experience. And women do talk about all these things when we get together. So I think I have a fairly good idea that it's not just me, but there are many of us who go through it.
Definitely.
And hence it, yes.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a decline, but yes, it's not a steady, downwards decline at a uniform rate. As I mentioned, even today, right now, after 20 years, there are periods, especially when we are off work, things do kind of, turn out very different as compared to a regular month or so. I do agree with Pal's point that childbirth, I think, kind of resets this part of the relationship. At least it did for us, and it took some time to kind of get back in the groove, if I can say so. Once our child was born, and I think that was an important kind of a pause, which took some time to kind of get over.
Right. And Bailey, Tiffany, before we go to the expert again.
The reflection for me on this segment was that how much the extraneous factors, as Pals mentioned and Gaurav added on, have a bearing. So I think the ups and downs, as one tracks it, probably one doesn't consider, and like I hadn't thought through change of location having a bearing, right? So, but that I think was the key takeaway for me.
Right. And now, Dr. Preeti, your thoughts on these patterns and specificities of patterns and big ticket changes like childbirth and movement. What do you see in your practice and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so very interestingly, actually, what pals actually pointed out, the childbirth can be detrimental to intimacy. But I have seen a lot of couples, and especially the women after the childbirth, they want intimacy, and the other partner is reluctant to have the intimacy at that particular point of time, or he's not available for having that intimacy at that particular point of time. It's also gone to that particular point. So somewhere, there's a very interesting thing that I had read somewhere, that it says that women's feeling for her partner are a major determinant of her sexual desire.
Right.
And it's above and beyond any hormonal contributions. Okay. So that is also a very, somewhere I think there's a lot of conditioning around it. I somehow feel that, it's almost like, okay, perimenopausal, menopausal, your body will something will start happening to your body, and you will start feeling a certain way. The intimacy will come down. Not really it happens. It has the same kind of graph for every woman.
Right.
And it doesn't have to, So if you are, I think, so similarly for all these situations where you give the birth to the child and uske baad you feel the intimacy kind of withers away, or it can, these are all those barriers, which are going to be players for your long-term relationship.
True.
So I guess.
So when you mentioned that women's need for intimacy is strong and they express it after this key childbirth event, I'm just doing a double click on that. And you often find, assuming heterosexual relationships, obviously that they have male partners. What is what are the chief reasons for reluctance of men in such situations?
So what I have seen is that one, that maybe sometimes a lot of time the men start sleeping in a different room because there's a baby. That also happens.
Right.
That is also one thing where one feels abandoned. The mother, the mother and the woman feels abandoned in the process also.
Right.
Because there are times when she wants some intimacy and that's not happening. Sometimes the male partner is kind of hesitant in having intimacy around the baby in the room.
Right.
That also happens. It's very uncomfortable.
Sounds very Freudian, given Indian men and the trope around us. That now that the woman is a mother, I can't have sex.
So these are one of, some of the reasons. So there is no problem solving that goes around it.
And Preeti, have you seen whether, one of the reasons is also because it is not as good as it used to be before. And that kind of plays back on the mindsets. Have you seen that kind of?
So yes, that possibly would be there, but maybe that experience has not come to me in situation like post, just immediately after the birth or something like that. But yes, the experience has kind of, the anticipation of the sex or the intimacy for that matter, or the expectation. So yes, that can be detrimental in going forward with this kind of intimacy.
As well as the act, because it changes a lot if you've had natural birth.
Right, so there's absolutely. Right, absolutely. So they are see, when we're looking at the intimacy, sometimes when the woman is looking, it might not always be the act per se. A lot of times it can be, at another level as well. It can be a foreplay. It could be just, touching, or it could be just kissing. Even the basics I'm talking about. Even that, for some time, it just seems that the woman is deprived of.
Right. That's a great question. There is so much nuance in that.
Yeah.
Sunny.
So that happens.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to say. One was that I thought that as time passes on, and we've talked about this, Suhasan, I think you echoed, that the longer a relationship gets to be, the quality of sex improves.
Definitely.
I think the thrill probably goes down, but the joy definitely goes up. So, pals, I disagree with this, that the quality probably is not up to the mark. The second thing that I wanted to say, and it can be a sensitive topic, but again, responding to what Preeti said, that the girl's desire maybe goes down over a period of time after marriage more than men's do. I wanted to talk about, there are actually two things to talk about. That there is desire, like how often do you feel desire? And the second is how often do you feel desire for this person, or how often do you end up, like fulfilling your desire with this person. And like from what we have read about, what the genetic makeup of people is, like men seek variety because they want to have offspring with, like, that's the genetic hard coding, whereas women seek, a steady relationship with one person so that the father supports, so on and so forth. So isn't it that, like, as time goes on, women should feel more desire for the man, whereas men can have this hereditary or genetic tendency to get bored and seek fulfillment of desire other than in the relationship? And I'm not just saying through, sex with other women, but maybe through porn, masturbation, fantasy, etc. How do you see the correlation of change in desire for the other person with the quantity of sex in the marriage as the years go by?
Okay. So I guess, you know what, something, so when we talk about, the correlation, now the sexual arousal or the sexual response, there is entire this model which is called incentive motivation model of sexual response, actually. Okay, wherein it is it's an interaction between biological, psychological, and contextual factors. Okay, so for women alone, the fact the man supports her might not be an aphrodisiac all the time. It might not maintain that desire for the longest time, for that matter. The stimulus has to be there, which can actually activate the sexual response system. And if the stimulus is not there, coming out from the other partner, then it's very difficult to maintain that level of arousal or desire, for that matter.
Right. I just want to rephrase my question a little bit. That
yeah, sure.
Are, like, men are hard coded to get attracted by variety, and I can attest to that. Are women hard coded?
But I think Sunny, I'll just, coming in there. I think the hard coding and the skew, I think has been, I think even the contemporary science on that has evolved to say that is too, like that skew is not as dramatic as we have been brought up to believe culturally, because the propensity across genders, it is not as divergent as probably is implied in your question. And passing it over back to you and others.
Right. So I have asked my question. I did want to get Preeti's and Pals's response.
I think it's overgeneralization, Sunny. I know I'm going to be at loggerheads with you on this. You said that just because the man is providing stability, support, which you think is genetically part of our genetic makeup to desire a man, we should desire the husband per se, who's a provider, more and more as we get older. But I think it's just a slice of time. You have to take a time slice and say perhaps that is the reason why we get married, and then we all grow up, and everyone evolves in their own way, and the desires also evolve in their own way, and you desire things differently. Maybe your desires don't grow in the same let's say in the same manner. So a male desire could be different and the female's desire could be different, and eventually there is disparity. Lucky couples would have both of them growing together at the same time with similar kind of experiences, with similar kind of ways of doing things, which is also there. We have seen it in long-term couples who have stayed together, who are touchy-feely, who do kiss each other even when they are 60 years old, etc., etc. So there are those couples also, but there are others who grow differently. And the woman might also desire well, what fuels her desire could be very different from just somebody being a provider. It could just be a visual thing. It could be fantasies, etc., etc. It's just that you don't know what is it that is fueling it. So sorry, but I do disagree. And yes, different ways, different strokes
No,
for different folks, I
sorry, I must
guess.
clarify. I disagree with that statement myself. I was just saying that, the reasons for the hard coding are explained thus. But my point really was that, the generic perception is that men seek variety, whereas women are happy to feel desire for the same person. Let's not go into the reasons because, I mean, those are genetic. They were valid maybe 10,000 years back. But, your answer makes sense. So thank you.
Preeti, do you want to take it or should I?
So no, I would just want to add one thing here. So when we talk about about men being hardwired, or maybe they're looking for more stimulation or maybe variety, as you say. So I think, Sunny, what happens here is when we talk about somebody who has high libido or high sexual desire in a relationship, we also have to see that sometimes with a very less effort, they want a arousal or they want a response from the other partner.
Mm-hmm.
And if that does not happen, they can demand it sometimes in our society. Maybe they can demand it and they can ask for it. But when when there is a minimal effort, the arousal and sexual response remains inhibited in some way or the other. And maybe that is one reason why the women possibly are not as participative in these intimacies going down the years a lot of times.
Right. I think once, just to get the group on this broad question, and I think let's think of porn and infidelity as as part of a large set, let's say, distractions which take couples away from desire for each other or actually acting on desire for each other. And obviously in culture and broadly we understand that the porn and infidelity and some of those themes have been touched. So what's the group's thinking? Like, we'll do going around the table once on what role do we see for distractions, porn, infidelity, etc. And in an ungendered way, let's say, for the sake of this conversation, what do we reckon is that broad role in this trend of people being dissatisfied or diminishing of, let's say, the spark? So, Gaurav, maybe you go. You haven't been in for a while.
So diminishing of spark, I agree. It happens. I'll be very honest here. But I guess the principle that applies here is like anything else. You have to work on it. If you rely only on just the stimulus or just just how you feel and when you feel for it, I guess overall you might not be very happy with the frequency as well as with the pattern of intimacy. It is important to create situations. I am a firm believer that a lot of times a planned session helps. I've done it, and I think that some amount of effort is needed there. As far as so, I'm not very sure, Suhas, what do you mean by the distractions, and how do they
Let's
impact
say things like porn
intimacy?
and infidelity, which Sunny talked about. What do you see that they contribute to this diminishing? Or
I think
obviously,
every couple would experiment with porn. I'm fairly sure about it, and I think the level of experiment or the extent and the time period of experimenting with porn, at least I guess, varies from couple to couple. As far as infidelity is concerned, I'm not very sure about whether it happens because of just the lack of a sexual relationship within the overall relationship, or are there factors beyond that? I would suspect that probably it's not just the physical aspect of it which leads to infidelity, maybe something deeper.
true. And Tals and Sunny have already gone, but Bailey, you have thoughts on this? This line of conversation around porn and infidelity and such?
So,
And I'm grouping it together just for efficiency.
got it. And I also wanted to weigh in on the previous. This thing was that the key aspect there, probably more than gendered, would be, I think what I caught was libido. We have to presume that instead of kind of stereotyping male versus female or men versus women, we have to recognize that maybe the libidos can be different, and they can be different at different points in time, and that and how to handle that could be a point of consideration. On this, I would, as a outsider, I would think clearly there would be distractions. As Gaurav is saying, in many of these cases, you would have to work on things, and if probably those are escapisms in their own way, and maybe they serve. I don't want to be judgmental. Maybe they have their own reason to exist. Maybe there are some relationships which work with a little bit of infidelity. Who knows? But prima facie, I would think would clearly be distractions.
And pals, your thoughts on this, and Sunny? As in, more to add on this?
Porn, I think, like Gaurav said, is essentially a tool. I think it's a useful tool, which, if appropriately used, and if you have good quality stuff that you watch together, can really help a relationship, can really take it to a different level. Especially if you've been in a long-term relationship and you've run out of ideas, I think porn is a great tool.
Right.
Yeah. Fidelity, oh boy. Very, very tricky. I think the feminist point of view is my body, my choice. And if it is important in your marriage, then so be it. There are several marriages which kind of work around it. Well, it's good for them. Maybe you can look at it as another tool for a different set of issues. It would solve certain kind of issues. Again, libido, if you're talking about very high libido people and couples means perhaps one with a high libido and the other not being able to fulfill it. Perhaps that would be a tool for them, and other things. But yes, it does say that there's a crack. It does show the cracks in a marriage, and it depends on how you want to take it forward.
Right. And Sunny, while you've been on it already, before we come to the expert, you have more to say on this?
Yeah, I have some thoughts about this. So, sometimes you're in a zone where, like we spoke, you can have sex twice a day for a week. But more often than that, like usually, I feel that libido is the first step to desire. And, maybe at my age, I am able to feel that a couple of times a week. And I cannot talk about using porn as a tool because we haven't used it as a couple, but I have used it alone. And what I found it is that, if I have orgasmed, so to speak, on my own, then my desire for my partner can be low. Like my libido can be low for a couple of days, and during that time I will not feel desire, and thus we will not have sex. So I do think that there is a finite number of times I can have sex, and if I bring porn in, or if there is another person, then it will definitely have implications for marital sex.
Right. So, Dr. Preeti, what do you think about these hot button themes? There are two parallel ones running.
Oh, yes.
Porn and politics.
Yes.
What are you seeing in your practice?
Right. First,
what's happening?
Let's talk about the porn. And I guess, so yes, porn is a very effective tool. It can, but it has to be used in the same way. So if, you can do it individually when you don't have a partner or the partner is not agreeing to it. Couples, I have seen couples who are doing really well with porn and they bond really well over that part of it, and their relationship has been, pretty all right in terms of the intimacy aspect of it. But yes, where, Abhi Sani just pointed out the fact that if you have a partner and you're addicted to porn and you're doing that, and that's also, I've seen, with that obsession that you're going on with that part of it. And so that does impact the relationship or the craving for the other, for your partner at that particular point of time. It becomes a substitute, so then it becomes disturbing. It does, it does create significant distress for the other partner in that case. तो उसमें क्या होता है, the wife finds it very threatening.
Right.
So every time she finds that person doing porn, then there are conflicts, then there are issues, and then that further takes away the male, because there's so much of a conflict around that part of it, that your partner doesn't look that desirable and attractive to you in that context.
Right.
So then it becomes, so then it becomes a difficult scenario for that matter.
And what do you see
porn
in the holy grail of
Yeah.
finding some reconciliation with infidelity in a monogamous relationship? Like, that's the big question of our times, I guess, when it comes to marriage and sex. So what do you see? Are people able to achieve that very delicate balance which it must surely entail?
Well, most unfortunately, when people come to me, they are not able to maintain that balance by the time they reach out to me, for that matter. But what I have seen is, the men, they are going for, very few men go for emotional infidelity. Most of them are going, it's more physical in nature. Vis-a-vis when women goes for it, it's more emotional.
Right.
So when men is out for the physical infidelity, he can still come back and have, still have his intimacy with his wife.
Right.
That still goes on. But for a woman who is engaged in an emotional infidelity, for her to come back and have that intimacy is extremely difficult.
So you see it deeply gendered, like it's very different responses.
So it depends. It depends. Yes, exactly. Not that men are not capable of having emotional, infidelity or something. It can be mixed also sometimes, for that matter.
Yeah.
But mostly when this happens, when there is an emotional aspect to it, then of course, coming back to your marriage, that relationship does take a, it does take a backseat quite a bit in that case.
Right. I think one interesting question we thought about when we were thinking of how to approach this very interesting topic was that if you have to think of or basically classify your thoughts after all the experience and thinking into what advice would you give to self and what advice would you give to your partner? So are there, Sunny, could you answer those two, like advice to self and advice to partner around having a happier sex life together? And then we'll go around the table.
Yeah.
Dr. Preeti, can you put your mic on mute, please? Sorry, there's some background.
Oh yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Yeah, I guess advice to self would be, cuddle more often, because whenever we have, it seems to lead to sex. So, but we just end up having less intimacy because, I guess, adult life takes over.
Right.
Advice to the partner. No, I think, I have a pretty perfect partner, sexually speaking.
We will accept this part and send it to your wife. That this is perfect. So okay, we'll provide that as a service at Testers. Pals, Gaurav, you want to go on this advice to self and advice to partner question?
Okay, let me go. Marriage is a very important life's choice that we make. I think it's a path that we choose. I guess everyone does it for their own reasons, and they do it not for one reason. There's a whole bunch of reasons that we think of. It's almost like a checklist. I think it's from both. I can talk about it from both the sides. It's a checklist which we need to tick: the need for togetherness, companionship, desire, yes; romance, yes; stability, family, growing up together, growing old together. So with all these things in place, over the years you see how the weightages change. So initially there are certain things which are more important, there are others which are less important. And as you grow old together, especially as soon as you hit your 40s, there's a switch which flips in your head and you kind of reassess there's this whole assessment thing that happens in your life, and you reassess and you see that the weightages have changed. Our relationship has changed. You accept it, go ahead. If you don't accept it, you try to change things. If you cannot do either, a lot of people kind of decide to eject, leave. So I think this is what I have seen in my 15 years of being married. So I have seen how this has changed, how it has kind of made me reevaluate what I really want and what is more important to me at this point of time. So if I look at this whole big picture, and then I say, okay, I need some advice. I need to give. I have a chance at making it better. So what is the advice that I give to my partner, and what is the advice I give to myself? So I think I would largely bunch my partner's advice into um, into keeping our relationship very gender specific. I'm sorry, I know this is a very controversial topic, but I have seen that, when you have a gender specific role in the family, it works really, really well. I know that it's really controversial.
I mean,
We are not get into
podcasts love controversial stuff, so don't worry about it.
I so don't call me mommy at home, and well, I've heard the other podcasts, and the whole objectification versus, how to keep desires alive is the objectification versus equality kind of thing. So I think the objectification thing really works if you want a physical relationship to be superlative. So bring that in time and again. I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad unless you do it all the time. Then I will feel bad. So do that thing. It works well. I have really seen a lot of my friends who are like, how would you say, ultra feminine, hyper feminine. They get a lot of sex, and I learned from that. I was like, oh, maybe yes, I don't want to be the one who's making all the decisions. Let me just take a step back and kind of help the decision making in the family from the back, from not holding the steering wheel, but from the back seat, and it just makes everyone happier. This is such a bad topic. This is such a controversial topic. I've had many arguments.
Pal, just to assure you, last time we were talking about it, and coincidentally, Dr. Preeti was our expert guest, and she talked about this point that over empathy can kill desire. And Bailey and I were both quite mind blown by that concept. That you can become so good a unit together and so equal that all objectification is gone, which often is more closely connected to desire. So it as a theme has come up earlier. I can see why you are cringing at the controversial, quote unquote, controversial point you're making. But please do feel free to go ahead.
Yeah. So that works. I've seen it work. I've seen it work in my family. My parents have that kind of a relationship, and we are so envious. I think I and my sister, we both are so envious because we want it, but we don't want to do all the stuff that my mother does. Be the nice housewife and the coy and feminine and nurturing, the whole works, around it. But you want the effects of what it would get you. So anyway, so I think that's one of the things. That's the advice I would give myself, and for my husband, maybe yes. Well, let's watch some more porn together. Let's learn something new, and let's try out more things.
That's very actionable. Gaurav, your thoughts?
So advice to myself, I guess, and I've been kind of seriously taking it earlier as well, is not to rely only on libido and take all possible support, all possible tools to ensure that intimacy stays strong. That's about it. Advice for partner, you said, right? The second point. I honestly haven't thought about it, so I'll skip that.
Lovely. So, Dr. Preeti, what do you think about all these amateur bits of advice as the pro advice giving person here?
Yeah, so I guess that was quite much of tips and food for thought we got from all the speakers out there. I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to talk about things, okay, so let me start with one thing which I really feel is important. We know about the men, they are, they indulge into masturbation pretty, pretty decently, I would say, if you compare it to the women. And that is one reason why the reward centers in the brain, they kind of are at it. They're activated a lot of times. For women, I've seen that the frequency is very, very low. And if they're not having that intimacy and they are not touching themselves, they almost forget what it feels to be in intimacy. They don't crave for it, they don't long for it, and they're almost like, pretty new to the whole thing. So I guess one, that the masturbation both for men and women is something which is something I would like to prescribe on a regular basis, which could maybe sometimes mutual masturbation, sometimes without having the act also, sometimes that also is fun, sometimes using sex toys would be really wonderful, individually and while you're having intimacy together, for that matter. Another thing, what happens is, when, as time goes by, a lot of the body changes, the appearances changes, a lot of remarks, comments go here and there, and sometimes that can make a woman or maybe a partner very uncomfortable in a relationship, in a physical situation, when intimacy is happening. And so if that time, if there is something which is kind of a disapproving, of how one looks and one be, the confidence really goes down. So it's very important that let's take stock of the confidence that we as an individual are feeling, and the partner should also, we can have a dialogue around that part.
Right.
And let's boost up that confidence that, because intimacy, sex is beyond the looks a lot of times. What you feel, what you can make each other feel, it doesn't matter how good looking you are. They can be good looking people and then they can have a, very different intimacy aspect of it. So that might not be the sole criteria for having a great sex life.
Right. That's a very good point. Actually, all of those are very good points, especially the prescription for masturbation. I think the pro-masturbation movement has to be much stronger in general across genders. So that's a very good point.
Yes, and from pretty early on, I would say, from the teen time itself, of course, going ahead, it can be a very different, it would be a different graph altogether if that starts properly. That's what
Fascinating.
I feel.
So it's time to plug in ads?
Yeah, absolutely. At Misters for Men's Masturbation, we do have a special product which helps in multiple ways. It's our best-selling product. Mm-hmm. So good heads up. Right. Always a good time to plug some product.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is great. And I think what we'll do now quickly, because we are towards closure, so let's call this closure time, and we'll go around the table once for thoughts on this discussion we've had, and things that should have been said that weren't said, or some point that needs highlighting. And this time, let's go with Bailey, who's been quiet for a while.
Two takeaways, Zara. One was that important to discuss libido, which I think probably over a period of time, for different reasons, one stops discussing enough, but probably communication and libido was one thought. Second thought for you was talking about adjacent business ideas, sex toys and ethical porn could be something that misters could consider.
Yeah, always good to have some free consulting. Duly noted. Maybe Gaurav, you go next, and Pals, then Sunny, and Dr. Preeti.
So yeah, that was interesting perspective. I think point on masturbation was really something that kind of was a very rough moment for me. That I hadn't thought about it in that manner. So that is the biggest takeaway from today's discussion. And obviously, Panel's point around the fact that there is a certain, I try to use that word, objectification at a certain level which is permissible. I think that again was very interesting. I normally don't get to hear that very often. So very fresh perspective on that.
Pals, your thoughts as we wrap things up?
Yeah, Suhas, I really enjoyed this session. I think I used to think I know it all, but I think my eyes have been opened. Preeti, thank you so much. I think I used to think masturbation for women is not a very uh, generic. It's not something that is prescribed per se, because I think we've never really had any conversations around it.
Mhm.
We've all thought that we need the men to take us to that level. But I think for me, I have discovered it and I love it.
Mhm.
Being the master of my own arousal is very
Very empowering.
it's really empowering.
Mhm.
But yes, we need the men, of course, guys. We need the
Yeah.
men
Yeah.
and the tools that you have. And Suhas, the recommendations I think would be really really good if the tools and all, and good quality stuff that can spice up our lives together is we look to misters for that. I think we really
Thank
really
you.
look to misters
That
for
is
that.
quite exciting for business and also as a vision for the future. It is no bad thing. Sunny, your thoughts?
So great conversation, both Dr. Preeti's advice and hearing Pal's thoughts was quite eye-opening for me as well. I think what we could have discussed more is what does desire over a period of time correlate to, like specifically what behaviors, what phases of life, what's happening, what do people do, etc. Uh, that could have been touched on more.
There will be a part two
Yeah.
of this.
There will be a part two. And now let's
Going to be
absolutely. I think there are a number of things which, as notes, are episode ideas in themselves. I think we should definitely do a pro masturbation episode straight up soon. Uh, and now coming to Dr. Preeti. So let's call this the expert window. What are things you want to emphasize or state things that we didn't cover? Your platform now.
So yeah, I think of course there can be various certain, now we can go into specifics going forward, possibly in next episode or something, where we talk about techniques and how people can actually spark up their relationships, for that matter. That is one aspect. Secondly, as I said, let's take the 6 month as a duration, which should be like a marker for us. Masturbation, pro masturbation should be the next thing after that. Maybe inculcating porn, sex toys would be, again, because you're breaking the monotony. It's very important for us to break the monotony somewhere, and one has to reflect on that aspect of it. Communication is the key area. It's the most important thing when you're talking about sexual intimacy. About both the quality and the frequency of communication is very important, as we have discussed in one of the previous episodes. I'm just kind of reiterating that.
Absolutely.
And yes, planning a sex date, I think one of the speaker really talked about it, and I think it works beautifully. You really bring around your entire day to just look forward to something, and and you plan it accordingly. So make some room for that in your life, and you will, and building, I think somewhere making this a priority would really help the physical intimacy, the sexual intimacy. I think if that happens, I think we'll be in a good space. The couples can be in a very good space.
Awesome.
And yes, last thing I want to add, I read somewhere, it was very interesting. Let not all the passion convert into compassion.
Right.
Otherwise, this intimacy just goes away. I mean, you can't definitely be all that passionate as you were in the beginning, because they say that you might lose your job and a lot of other things in the process, because 24/7 you'll be, texting, be connected and wooing each other. But yes, make sure some passion remains, and for that you have to do all these things, which does mean some effort has to go in there.
Brilliant. That is all very actionable. I absolutely love this episode and the conversation. We have so many more episode ideas from here. But that is it for this week. Loved having you as the audience, everyone. Thank you for joining. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode of Talking Sex. Till then, wishing everyone very happy sex. Good night. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Night, folks.
Right.
Bye bye. Good night.